From the age of 17, I was working as a journalist. The training was go to the pub, don't come back till you got a story. The biggest thing that's different to now really is the immediacy. I remember Paul Gascoigne walking off after training. I walked up to him and said, "Gazza, will you do an interview?" And he said, "No, bugger off, I don't like the media." Duncan Edwards was the only footballer that he looked up to and felt inferior to. I think the fans like to see good tackles. You know, we don't see a lot of crunching tackles these days. Personally, I don't blame the technology, I blame the people operating the technology. It's always down to human error. You know, it's how you use the technology. And also I think it's open to exploitation. You know, one of the biggest problems these days, of course, which we haven't really talked about, is how players are trolled on social media. I think it's one of the things that's changed the most. I mean, when I first started, the recognition and appreciation of mental health problems was non-existent. I think I've probably been through mental health issues that I've not even recognized as being mental health issues.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for joining me at the We Are Mentally United podcast. I'm really appreciative of that, and I'm really grateful for that. I've been following your work for a long period of time, and it's really, really, really inspiring. The journalism that you do around sports, media, and all the documentaries that you have been working and creating on and putting out there. Um, for those of the folks who may not be familiar with your work, can you share a little bit about yourself, how your journey began, and where you're from, and what you have been working on?
See, it's great to see you again, and thanks for having me on your show. Yeah, it's been a long time. I mean, I've been worked in the media now since the 70s. Makes me seem like prehistoric, but the world has changed quite a lot since I first started working in the media. Uh, we've got to know each other, I think, through my own sort of like channels, because I've developed my own channels, which is the big thing that's changed from when I first started in the media. Anybody now can have their own media channels. I mean, I've got my own YouTube channels and a presence across all social media, you know, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Everybody wants media. Media is what everybody wants to have, and everybody seems to be able to do it themselves these days. So it makes my job a lot more difficult trying to survive in the media world. But I think the thing that really stands out to me is how everybody now is a sort of citizen journalist almost. Everybody thinks they are a filmmaker. So trying to stand out from the crowd is the real challenge. But going back to when it all started, when I started in Manchester, and as a local newspaper reporter at the age of 17, I was a little bit of a whiz kid at school. I missed a year out at school, and instead of going to university, which what my school expected, I went straight to work for the local newspaper. So from the age of 17, I was working as a journalist. The training was go to the pub, don't come back till you got a story. So I've always had the ability to break the ice and to speak to people and to read people's body language, really, because when you're in a crowd on your own, it's particularly hard as a young person. It gets easier as you get older because you tend to have more authority. I think when you're young, it's easy to get dismissed as a young person. People think, well, he doesn't know anything. He's too young to know anything about life. So when you get older, I think it does make it a lot easier to engage and get people to talk about their stories. But for me, it's been a great journey. I mean, I've worked in newspapers, radio, television, and as an independent now for over 30 years. I mean, I've been independent, running this independent production company, which is now only me. I used to have 10 people working for me, but the world has changed. And this is my 34th year now operating as an independent filmmaker. So the world has changed a lot.
Definitely, it definitely has. And I feel like now the world is more revolving around the clickbait articles and stuff like that, whereas before it was more around stories and structures and going out there and doing actual journalism and stuff. How have you adapted to this new world of journalism, and how different does it feel like as compared to back in the day when you were all working around in newspapers and delivering newspapers and having up articles out by midnight or by early morning. So how different does it feel, and how have you evolved and grown in that area yourself? Because you've been doing this for 34 years now.
I think I survived by being versatile. That's the key thing. You've got to be versatile these days. I think the best skill anybody can have is being able to learn a new skill quickly. Because in the old days, you pretty much were not a one-trick pony, but you had to decide what you wanted to be. So when I first started off as a journalist, the editor of the newspaper group said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I want to be a photojournalist. He said, you can't do both. You've either got to do words or pictures. And at the time I was a writer, so I thought I'll stick to writing. And that was how I started off as a newspaper writer, as a journalist in the old school of journalism. The biggest thing that's different to now really is the immediacy. I mean, now people, it's about being first rather than being right, because people want to get their URL or they want to get their content out as soon as possible to get the traffic. Whereas in the old days, well, by the time I was 18, I was a sports editor of the local paper because it was a newspaper group. I started in Warrington. They put me in charge of the Altrincham Guardian sport. I was a sports editor from the age of 18. And every week I used to go over to Warrington where we used to print all the newspapers. Uh, and it was kind of exciting and romantic in a way, insofar that all the newspapers were made up on hot metal. And before you roll the presses, you get a proof of each page and you'd have to read the proof and check it. And then if there was any mistakes, the guy would be getting it's almost like a chisel and he'd be making the hot metal up with the lines of type and making up the page. And when you roll the presses, that was it. That was a big responsibility, because when you roll the presses, you can't stop the presses once you start them, and that's it. I mean, that's it till next week. So if you made a mistake, you have to wait until the following week to make a correction. Whereas nowadays, people put up a story and they've changed it after 10 seconds or 20 seconds when they've realized they've got the story wrong, or they've typed something wrong, or they've put the wrong picture in, or they've got the wrong meaning because they put a word in which shouldn't be in there. So the big difference, the big difference is in terms of the immediacy. You can go live on your mobile phone. You can talk to anybody in the world. I'm talking to you now from a few thousand miles away on Zoom, through, I've got my computer, my laptop connected up to my camera, and I've got a microphone here. I mean, that technology didn't exist. I mean, in my day, the phone was attached to the wall. And if you wanted to get hold of somebody, and if they weren't at home, you couldn't get hold of them. I remember when I first started out as a sports journalist at the local paper as a sports editor, I used to cover a team called Altrincham, which is where Manchester United play some of their youth team game, and not youth team game, but they've played some of their games over the years at Altrincham Football Club, and there's always been a little bit of a connection between Altrincham and Manchester United. But in those days, I used to cover the team that was in the Vauxhall Conference, I think it was in those days, or was it maybe even the Northern Premier League? But it's one of the non-league sides. But the manager was a guy from Liverpool, a Scouser, and his mentor was Bill Shankly, who used to be the manager of Liverpool for many years. He was like he was a man that made Liverpool great. I mean, his hero was Sir Matt Busby, and he was very close to Matt Busby. But the thing was, the reason I mentioned Bill Shankly was if I couldn't get hold of Tony Sanders, who was the manager of Altrincham, I'd ring up Bill Shankly, because I knew that Tony Sanders' mentor was Bill Shankly, and he'd always go there once a week. So I built up this relationship with Bill Shankly because I knew he'd always be at home because he'd retired. And I used to ring him every week, and I was this sort of 18-year-old kid. And I used to like me ringing up. We used to speak about football for half an hour or an hour, sometimes 2 hours, because we just talked about football. And he liked my enthusiasm and the fact that I, was into football. And but that really tells you how different it was then, because I used to have to ring Bill Shankly to try and find out where Tony Sanders was, because nobody had mobile phones. I remember going to cover a match in Norwich when I used to write for the Sunday Mirror, because I wrote for the Sunday Mirror, a national newspaper, for about 23 years. That was my weekend job. I used to drive all over the country covering football. I remember going once to a match in Norwich and my car broke down, and I was in the middle of nowhere. There was no phones. And I had to walk miles to get a phone box to be able to ring the office to say I'm not going to make the game because my car's broken down and I'm going to get there late. And they had to get like a local agency guy to cover the match, I guess. I can't remember. It would have been in the 80s. So you're talking 40 years ago. But that was how it was. I mean, you couldn't just sort of get on the phone or send somebody a WhatsApp message or a text or, FaceTime them. You were literally cut off if you were breaking down like I did on the motorway. Well, it wasn't even the motorway, it was a country lane, because I didn't have motorways in those days. Going to Norwich was one of the furthest clubs I had to go to, Norwich City Football Club.
Yeah.
So
And I feel
lots of
like
things have changed, things that stand out straight away.
definitely, and I feel like one of the best things at that time must have been these genuine connections that you may have been making up, because an 18-year-old who is working in the newspaper, communicating regularly with Bill Shankly, that I don't think that's going to happen in today's time and age, with an 18-year-old trying to get in touch with Eric Ten Hag or Klopp or Pep Guardiola, because that's not how it works. these days. So it must have been a really genuine connection. It must have felt really good for you in terms of where you were professionally at that time.
I didn't really appreciate at the time how successful and how privileged I was to be doing what I was doing, because there wasn't the media that you've got today. I mean, when I was 19, I already had my own local radio show on a Sunday. I used to go into Piccadilly Radio in Manchester to do like a little, I think it was like a 5 minute sports slot on the end of at the end, I think it was 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock or 7, must have been 7 o'clock. It was a 7 o'clock news roundup, and I had a little sports section. And I had to ring up the managers of Manchester United and Manchester City at home. Do you know what I mean? I remember the first time I did it, I had to ring up Tony Buck, who was the manager of Man City at the time. I did this recording. And then when I went back to play it back, there was nothing on the tape. Because in those days, you had to do everything yourself. And you used to have to cut the tape up with with a splice, like a knife, and rejoin the tape to cut out bits that you didn't want. But I hadn't pressed record. So I had to ring up Tony Buck and say, I'm only a young kid. First time I've ever done it. There's nothing on the tape. Can we do it again? And he was lovely. We did it again. It's never the same when you do it the second time. But he got me out of jail because without that, I'd have had nothing. I remember Ron Atkinson. We didn't get to speak to him very often because he used to do a post-match interview with the reporter Tom Tyrrell, who was the main guy. So I'd often have him on tape before, but quite often I'd have to ring people up and do an interview and record it in the day, and then have it ready and edited before you go out 7 o'clock news. But that was one of that again. It's like even going on decades after that. I remember even as late as the 90s. Yeah, the 90s, I'd be covering where my office is now in Marlow, Buckinghamshire. I'm 30 miles west of London because I came down to London to find fame and fortune when I got married when I was 21. But walking distance to where I am here, there's a place called Bisham Abbey National Sports Centre. An England football team used to train there before they built the new Wembley, and then they created a new training camp at St George's Park, which is in the Midlands. But here at Bisham Abbey, I mean, a lot of the Olympic athletes train here. I mean, I think the most medals that were won at the 2012 Olympics they all trained at Bisham Abbey. But back in the old days, England football team used to train at Bisham Abbey. And I remember doing training sessions with Terry Venables when he was England manager. And it'd literally be me and one camera guy. And then I'd say to Terry Venables, can I get some interviews after you finish training? He said, just grab who you want. I remember Paul Gascoigne walking off after training. I walked up to him and said, Gazza, will you do an interview? And he said, no, bugger off. I don't like the media. But we had a little bit of banter in the interview. But it was just such a different time. Do you know what I mean? That you had access, easy access. You didn't have press officers. You didn't have people telling you who you could speak to and who you couldn't speak to. You didn't have people telling you what questions you can ask. I remember doing a documentary for the Chinese state broadcaster about the history of football. And I remember it seems like we're talking a lot about Man City, but because we didn't get access to Man United at the time, we did a lot of the filming at Man City for this Chinese broadcast. I did some filming with Pep Guardiola. I did a one-to-one interview with John Stones, but the football club insisted on agreeing all the questions before we did the interview, which is not how I work normally. But the Chinese state broadcaster had agreed to all this. So we had a list of questions. I went through all the questions. I put them in my own style. But they'd also sent me a message saying, can you get John to say happy birthday to Lee Wan Chon or whatever his name was? I went to ask the question about, can you say happy birthday? And the guy jumps in and says, no, it's not on the list of agreed questions. You can't ask it. And Stones is looking at me like, what's going on? It's a bit mad. But that's the extreme of what we've got to in some situations, that when you do interviews, sometimes they kind of censor what they want to talk about, which is kind of what I always fight against. I don't agree with censorship of any type. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about creating my own platforms and my own social media voice, because I'm not answerable to anybody else. Nobody can censor me. People can say we don't want to talk to you or whatever. But even when I was doing stuff for Man United TV, there were certain things you weren't allowed to talk about. For example, you weren't allowed to talk about the Glazers. I mean, we've moved on past that now because things have changed and we've got a new guy running the show with co-owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But when I made documentaries for Manchester United, as in-house documentaries, you're kind of like, there were certain rules about what you can and cannot do. Whereas when I make my own films, I don't have those rules. So I feel like I've got a lot more authenticity doing it independently. The problem with doing things independently is making sure you're making a living and making money, because it's a lot more difficult to make money now. You know, when I first set my company up here, I'm in this office, I've been here for over 30 years, set the company up in 1990. You know, again, I was ahead of my time because we didn't have the competition that you've got now. I used to make football videos and programs for a lot of football clubs in the Premier League and the Championship. I think the most we did was one season, we did 13 football clubs in the top two divisions.
Wow.
And in those days, I would make video reviews, video magazines, end of season videos, history videos, great goal videos. And people used to buy them. You know, I remember one year we made 100 titles, which is average of 2 a week, because I had 10 people working for me. And we turned over £1 million in the mid-90s, which was a phenomenal amount of money for a small independent. And we used to sell thousands, you know. There's probably about 5 million videos and DVDs out there that I've made that have been produced and published by my company. But nowadays, if I haven't brought out a DVD for a few years. I mean, people don't buy them anymore, unfortunately. Although I do have 50 titles on Amazon, so people can buy a lot of my football titles on there. Everything from the first 100 years of West Ham to the official history of Ipswich Town to, you know, Millwall Football Club history, uh, tapes about football clubs up and down the country, from Newcastle to Arsenal to Plymouth. And the most recent DVD I did was actually a Manchester United one about the world's oldest Manchester United supporters club, which is based in Malta, which is a whole different story that we can talk about if you want to. One thing I think I should mention that I think you wanted me to talk about was when I was born. I was actually born, when I meet people, and they want to know my age, I say, well, guess what decade I was born in? And I'll tell you, because most people don't guess that I was actually born in the 50s. I was born at the end of 1959. But I was born a year after the Munich air disaster, kind of 18 months after the Munich air disaster. So I grew up in the shadow of Munich, and my dad was a big Manchester United fan, and my uncle, his brother. And they were taking me to Old Trafford from the age of five coming on 6. I mean, I was going to football at Old Trafford in 1965. So I grew up watching Best, Law and Charlton and that whole great team that won the European Cup in 1968. But the whole decade between 58 and 68 was the whole story about why Manchester United became the best supported football club on the planet, because people were moved by the story that we had the Munich air disaster. We lost 8 Busby babes, including Duncan Edwards, possibly. A lot of people from that generation will say was the greatest footballer of all time. And a lot of the people I've interviewed, including Bobby Charlton, who's not with us anymore, sadly, who parted last year, but he always said that Duncan Edwards was the only footballer that he looked up to and felt inferior to. And so many people I interviewed from those generations, when they say he was the greatest footballer, they'd always say Duncan Edwards. So I kind of smile now when people argue about Messi and Ronaldo, because it's a different football game, really. I mean, we can talk about that as well if you want, but there's so much history, and so much has changed, not just in the media, but in the sports that I specialize in covering sport, but I do other things as well. But the sport itself has changed so much. I mean, Duncan Edwards never earned more than £15 a week. The maximum wage in the 50s was £15 a week. And he used to go to Old Trafford on his bicycle. I mean, it was a completely different world to where we are now, where we had Ronaldo, who left United and went to Saudi Arabia to earn allegedly £4 million a week. I mean, money is just, I think it's obscene personally. I think it's too much money being paid to sports stars. I mean, how much money do you need? Once you're earning more than £100,000 a week, how much do you need? And I think it becomes more of an ego situation rather than needing to earn the money, because they've got enough money for several lifetimes, and their families and their kids and their grandkids. But I think it becomes a case of I'm earning more than you because I'm better than you. And if you're earning more than me, I want more than you because I think I'm better than you. And I think it becomes more bragging rights rather than how much money do you actually need. But that's a whole different story as well.
I feel like people these days have also started using money as a measuring tool of success. So if you're making more money, you're more successful, which is why I feel like a lot of these players, when they're getting transferred to different clubs, they want to be the highest paid player in either the club, the league, or at least be there in the top three or top five. That's one of the major communication that happens. That probably happened with Jaden when he joined us. That happened with Anthony when he joined us in terms of how much they're gonna get paid. Casemiro when he joined us. So I feel like has a lot of it has to do with it being measured in terms of success rather than your performances being measured in terms of success. And I think that's one of the major reasons why so much of I don't know if you say inflation, but so much of money is getting spent around and is getting bounced around, even in smaller league teams. Like even for teams like Nottingham Forest or Luton, they are already signing free agents and they're paying a hefty amount of price to get them in. Um, and it is disappointing. It's definitely disappointing because I feel like it's taking away the internal desire or the internal drive from the players because I feel like money is becoming more forefront for a lot of these players as compared to performances, as compared to the club, as compared to doing something for the club. Because I feel like back in the time, and not even that far back, just 15, 20 years ago, players were extremely passionate around and loyal around football clubs. But now money has become a deciding factor. Like someone like Marcus Rashford, I would have never thought, like even 5 years ago, I would have never thought talks about him moving on to a different club. But now that seems like a possibility. Probably not now, but probably in the next 3, 4 years, that seems like a possibility. But when he started playing, I never thought that would even be a possibility because I grew up watching Giggs, Scholes, Neville, all these players who came through the United bracket and were loyal and stayed with the club until the last of their few years. And some of them retired at the club too. So that's what I used to also think about players like Marcus and others would be doing. But now I feel like even that could change in terms of them leaving the club and going for a big money transfer move, or even the club just putting them off the shelves and being like, okay, we have to cash you on and bring someone else. So I feel like it's damaging the game in some ways, definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's kind of what I was saying in a way, really. But I think it all really started to change big time when the Premier League started, because that's when the money. I mean, the Premier League when it first started was not the Premier League that it is today. It was a much smaller organization, and even my company, we used to be host broadcaster at a lot of Premiership games. They called it the Premiership then. They call it Premier League now.
Hmm.
But we used to film. We used to be the host broadcaster at quite a few clubs that were in the Premier League, but we were the only cameras there. So when it first started, we were only covering on two cameras. And then I think by the end of the 90s, we got up to about six cameras. But again, we were still the only cameras there if the game wasn't live on TV or it wasn't like a featured match or match of the day.
Hmm.
I think young people today can't imagine what it was like, because nowadays, every single game that's played at the top level, you can see it on YouTube within a couple of hours of the game, the highlights. And then you can see all the highlights, and you can see extended highlights, I think, on Sky Sports for all the matches. Then you got Match of the Day, which I work for on primetime BBC One, the national network channel here, where you can see all the highlights from all the games. But when the Premier League first started, it was really only two or three games that were on Match of the Day. And then the rest of the games are rounded up almost like a news report. We'll hear the goals from the rest of the games. And that footage would come from my company and another company that was based in Sheffield. And between the two of us, we covered all the games in the Premier League. Uh, but going back to the host broadcast coverage, I mean, literally, there were matches. For example, when Man United beat Ipswich 9-0, that was my company
Hmm.
that filmed the match. We filmed it on six cameras. And the only coverage that exists from that game is what we filmed. But nowadays, it's all been changed since about 2000, when the Premier League chief executive who took over at the time, he was a lawyer. He suddenly realized that they didn't own the archive because it was stuck at places like mine and the place up at Sheffield. And we had a big backlog of archive. But then what they did was, rather than allow companies like mine to film the matches on a speculative basis, because then we own the footage, they turned it round where all the football clubs had to put the contract out to tender. So the football clubs had to pay the independent to film the matches so that then the Premier League and the clubs own the footage. But now it's kind of moved on to a different level where every single game is covered by Sky, and this isn't the Premier League I'm talking about, Sky, TNT, which used to be BT, which is now owned by Discovery, and BBC will cover a few games. But the rights money is paid big time by Sky and TNT Sports. And then secondary rights, you've got the highlights on BBC. But then the point is that these are all full OBs, whereas when the Premier League first started, it was literally 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cameras at games. And it wasn't like now, every time there's an incident, you've got the analysis and you've got the VAR. And sometimes days after the match is finished, they come up with another angle that you haven't seen because the VAR haven't looked at the right angle. Even thinking about the game against Liverpool when we got pegged back and it was 2-2, the late penalty. There's a replay that we've seen on social media where it shows that there was no contact on what looked like a foul. So it's almost like forensic now.
Yeah.
And it's totally different.
We should have definitely won that game. I was so mad when that penalty was given up, and that was so upsetting because it clearly was not a penalty. And it has happened a couple of times now this season with us, especially in terms of decisions just not going our way. It happened in Arsenal, it happened in this game. There were some other games also in which I guess it was Pelestri in one of the games who was tackled, and no penalty was given up in that game either for us. So it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous when you have all these technologies and you are moving in a specific direction, but you're still not availing or using that technology well and rightfully. And it makes you get more upset, I feel like, in terms of the games, because back in the time you would blame the ref, you would blame the decision, or you would blame the human error kind of a thing. Whereas now when you bring in technology, there should be no chance of human error because technology should.
I personally don't blame the technology. I blame the people operating the technology. It's always down to human error. It's how you use the technology. And also I think it's open to exploitation because I think you can be selective on what cameras you show that you're looking at. And I can't remember the game, but I remember there was a game where Eric Ten Hag wasn't happy. He said we were looking at the wrong camera angle. And I understand totally what he's talking about because you can look at one camera angle and you can give a different verdict to looking at a different camera angle. And it is open to manipulation, in my opinion. And also the mere how many frames in a second. In America, you have NTSC, which is 30 frames. Here we have 25 frames, PAL. But one frame to another frame is not precise enough between when, how do you exactly decide when the ball was kicked in terms of a moment in time? If you're a fraction late in where you press the button, it's going to give a different outcome to where the guy is who's getting the ball. So to me, it's not precise enough to be as accurate as what they're using it when they draw a line. And quite often that line is so close that it's like, if you've got a big nose or a big elbow or, big foot, you're more offside than somebody with a smaller foot. And to me, it's too, if it's that close, it's not offside. And I think the offside rule needs looking at personally. But when it's that forensic, you can say, yes, you're either offside or you're not offside. But to me, it's not reliable. And I think how we use the technology needs to be looked at. I think how we make it part of the game. I think now it's too many games. I know when I'm at Old Trafford, sometimes you don't know what's going on because you're waiting 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, sometimes longer, to get a verdict. And there's not enough information. At Old Trafford, they haven't got the big screens, but also they're taking too long. If it takes more than 30 seconds or 60 seconds, for me, it's not a clear and obvious mistake. So there should be a time limit on it. I think there should be a limit to how many times you use VAR. I'd like to see it more in line with other sports where you maybe have the coach can make a challenge or 3 challenges in a game, and it becomes then part of the game because the coach has to use it correctly. But I think at the moment it's too random. We get games now where we get 10 minutes plus injury time because we've had stoppages and VAR. and games
Hmm.
now are running out of control. I mean, the game when we played Chelsea the other week, the winner was at the 101st minute of a 90-minute game. I mean, it's becoming commonplace, and to me,
Yeah.
it's the game needs looking at because you've got the modern technology, how you use it, but I think it's not being used correctly at the moment, and I think it's becoming all about. Also, the other thing, I think the referees want to be the stars of the show. Really, a football match in the old days, you go to a game, and if you didn't notice the referee, he'd had a good game. When you go home and you're talking about the referee, then he's not had a good game. But now
Yeah.
the referees have got agents. They're all sitting in there at Stockley Park when we're talking about the Premier League again, and they're making themselves the story. They shouldn't be the story. They're just a tool to play
Hmm.
the game. We shouldn't really be hearing about the referees all the time. And if we are hearing about them, when we really want to hear about them, we don't hear from them. You know, if the referee's made a bad decision or controversial, we want to hear him explain why he's giving that decision. And they hide behind all the secrecy. To me, it's all wrong.
No,
But
I
I feel like
completely.
I'm starting to rant now.
No, no, no. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, and I would definitely say that's something that I resonate a lot with. One of the matches that really I won't say it upsetted me, but it really surprised me was last year when we last or 2 years before when we played Brighton, and the game ended, and then we got a penalty because of a decision that was going on, and then this Chelsea game happened, and I was like, my God, like they need to really catch up a grip, but. I completely agree with you in terms of soccer or Premier League needs to take hints from other sports. Like cricket has those three review rules that they can take up a good idea from, as you spoke about. I also feel like American football or NFL has a rule where the referee or the umpire goes directly into the front camera and communicates with the whole audience and says why the foul occurred, why it was occurred, what happened, and what did not happen. I feel like in a lot of these controversial decisions, that should also be a tone that they could adapt. But again, are the referees gonna be confident enough? Are the referees gonna be honest enough, or do they even know what's going on in a lot of situations? And probably that's why they're not pushing up these things. But there are different ideas that they can definitely implement and make it more visible and make it more transparent for a lot of the fans.
I think that when you hear the referee talking, I think, you know, I used to play rugby union as well as football, soccer. But rugby union, we see the internationals and you hear the referee explaining what he's doing and you hear him, he's mic'd up. You can hear him all the time. I mean, the reason I don't do that in football, in my opinion, is because I don't trust, uh, well, I don't think I think they're worried about giving too much clarity, but also it's the language, you know, it's a family audience. You can hear swearing when you go to a football match, but, you know, swearing is kind of like, you know, bad language is, I think one of the things that they're probably worried about because it's how footballers speak is probably a little bit different than how rugby players speak. You know, I used to say that football was watched by hooligans, played by gentlemen, but, you know, and rugby was played by hooligans and watched by gentlemen. I'm not sure I've got that the right way around, but the point is, rugby union, it tends to be a safer sport for hearing what's being said on the field of play. Whereas I think what's said on the field of play in football, maybe that's one of the ways of getting them to speak nicer by having them mic'd up. But I'd love to see football referees being mic'd up, and I think they are doing some experiments. I'm not sure. I did read about something somewhere in a competition. I can't even remember what country it was, but they have been doing experiments. But to me, the clarity of hearing what's going on, I think it's essential really in the modern day. I mean, you know, quite often people at home watching telly know what's going on, but the people in the stadium don't know what's going on. So it's not just for the TV audience. I think you should be able to hear it in the stadium as well. But again, I'm not sure what the technology is on that. All stadiums need big screens. Some stadiums like Man United and Liverpool haven't got the big screens, so I'm not sure how that would happen. But I do know there was some tests quite a long time ago. I think it was in rugby where you used to have headsets where you could hear on your own personal headsets what's being said, and that was kind of an interesting idea. I'm not sure what happened to that, but
Interesting.
yeah, there's
Well,
lots of ways that we can make sport better. We do tinker with it quite a lot, to be honest, and but the more they tinker with it, the more complicated they seem to make it, and they don't seem to make it better sometimes. So There's
Yeah.
room for improvement, I think.
Def Definitely. And like when they first introduced VAR, it seemed like a really good concept. It seemed like something that would solve a lot of problems. United lost a league, I guess, back in 2006 or 2005 to Chelsea because of an offside goal that Chelsea scored, which we could have won if VAR was there, and Fergie could have won 4 titles in a row. But so when VAR was introduced, I was quite optimistic about it. But now I just feel like it's just becoming too irritated. Like every time, because I live in the US, I don't go to the live games as you do, but every time United scores or any team scores, the first instinct in my head is, was there a foul? Was there an offside? And that just takes away the fun, I feel like, of celebration, the fun of being in the moment and enjoying and rejoicing with it, because you're constantly thinking if this goal will stand or not. And then if that goal stands, that usually stands after 3 or 4 or 5 minutes if it's like, if it's a close call. And that just takes away, I feel like, it personally for me,
Yeah.
it just takes away that energy, that just takes away that immediate passion kind of a thing that I feel when they score. And it's like, okay, yeah, thankfully they like, they allowed it kind of a thing. So now it feels like a nuisance in a way. And I'm generally torn in terms of if this is a good thing or if this is a bad thing, because we're still making mistakes. There are still mistakes being made, even with VAR being there. So what's the use kind of a thing?
So I think that's a key point, really, because we got VAR to get rid of the mistakes, but we still have probably as many mistakes as we used to have. So we haven't got rid of the mistakes. But what's the real kicker is that we don't have the, like you said, when you score a goal, it's like when United won the treble and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has done it, the commentator says, or something to that effect. But you don't want the commentator to be saying, well, the ball's in the net. Let's go to VAR to find out if we won the game. And that's kind of where
Exactly.
we are. So players sometimes don't know whether to celebrate or not celebrate. But then sometimes you get two celebrations. You celebrate scoring the goal and then you celebrate the VAR decision. But it's
Hmm.
not quite right. And it doesn't fit comfortably for me. So I think, I don't say get rid of the technology. I mean, the best technology we have is the goal line technology because that, it's either a goal or it's not a goal. And, we had a famous one, Frank Lampard in the World Cup. I think it was against
Hmm.
Germany when the ball was clearly over the line and everybody knew who watched it on TV. It was over the line. It was miles over the line, but the goal didn't stand. I mean, it probably didn't change the result of the game. I think Germany would have still beaten England, but the reality was that England were denied a chance to win that game because the goal was disallowed, and that was one of the main reasons that we got goal line technology came in. I think, uh, but we had one. I remember when Paul Scholes scored a goal in the Champions League game. I think it was the Mourinho game, wasn't it? When he ran down the touchline when he was a Porto manager and they
Hmm.
beat United. But his whole career was built on a goal being ruled out for offside when it was never offside. That's not goal line technology. But again, the technology was brought in to sort of get rid of things like that, where it was clearly the decision was wrong, you know. But now we're studying microscopic forensic evidence,
Hmm.
and it's gone too far. And I think we need to tone it down. We need to regulate it by having less VAR interventions. I think that's the key thing, really. Uh, but we also need to use a bit more common sense. And I think the offside rule needs to be changed so it's not forensic. It needs
Hmm.
to be, I think they need to think about it a little bit more in terms of what's offside. It used to be that the attacker always had the benefit of the doubt. But it seems to me that now they're looking for a reason to disallow a goal and in favour of the defender rather than the attacker, which I think it should be the other way around. Some beautiful goals disallowed for forensic decisions, which in my opinion is killing the game in a way. Not killing it totally stone dead, but it's taking the edge off the beauty of the game.
For sure. Especially when you slow it down and then you show up the tackles, they're always going to look bad as compared to when they actually happen. Because when you're slowing it down, you're basically seeing frame by frame by frame by frame. So it's obviously going to look worse. So that's another thing that I really dislike in terms of the game, because clearly there are some fouls, especially with Casemiro. I feel like Casemiro is one of them who has faced the most scrutiny in these slow frame by frame actions kind of a thing. And has gotten carded a lot of times because of it. And that's just ridiculous for me, because the game is happening in lifetime. It's not happening in a slow motion thing. So it just doesn't make sense to me.
We talk about how things have changed. I mean, that's one of the things that's changed big time because Some of the players that I grew up watching, they get sent off every week. I mean, people like
Roy
Nobby
Keane.
Stiles, Patrick Crowand, Roy Keane, and even as recent as Roy Keane. If you had the rules that you have today, you'd be sent off every game, or he'd have to change his game. He would have to change his game because you couldn't you couldn't play where you're getting sent off every week. So I mean, football again, it used to be a contact sport. To me, it's gone too far the other way. I mean, there used to be the players used to need more protection than what they used to get. I remember I remember Dennis Law saying who was the hardest player he played against, and he came up with Chopper Harris, who used to play for Chelsea, and he said that he should have been in prison because he used to really chop people up at the knees. I mean, his job really was to get you and to take you out of the game. Where football was different in those days. Leeds had Norman Hunter, Liverpool had Tommy Smith, Man United had Nobby Stiles, Chelsea had Chopper Harris. All these teams had a hard man, and
Hmm.
football was a different sport. Whereas footballers did need protection from people like that. But we've gone too far the other way now, where if you sort of blow on a player and he falls over, it's a foul, and it's become a little bit of a joke, really, to be honest. And I think some other sports, like rugby, for example, look down on football because it's seen as being a soft sport. I'm not saying that we don't get injured playing football because we get some really bad injuries, but it's when you're deciding about whether or not somebody's been fouled. And again, unfortunately, the ethos of football players, some of them don't mind what I call cheating, basically, because if you con the referee, some cultures think that's part of the game and it's great. I mean, when Maradona did his hand of God, he got a lot of praise in his own country because they thought that was fantastic. He'd done something great. But I mean, here in England, we say he's cheated because he handled the ball and put it in the net with his hand. But the fact he got away with it, some countries see that as part of the game. You get away with
Hmm.
what you can. If you get away with it, you've won.
Yeah.
Not won as in winning the game, but you've won because you've done something good.
Hmm.
But it's a
And
case of how do you see sport?
no, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there I completely agree with you on that because like it's all part of the game and that's how it should be taken. Also feel like it takes away a lot of drive and passion from the players who are on the pitch because back in the time, that's why I feel like Pet Vieira against Scholesy, Rooney, Vidic, Terry, a lot of these players were really passionate into their game, and you could see their passion in terms of how they would tackle, how they would approach the ball, how they would kick the ball. Whereas there's very few of them left. Like even if I have to start thinking about it, I really cannot come up with a lot of names. Probably Rodri, but Rodri is still not on that level of in terms of aggressiveness or passion as these other players were. And it just I just feel like it dilutes the game a lot. And it just makes it too much like tennis. Tennis is a gentleman's game, but soccer is not supposed to be that. Soccer, as you said, it's supposed to be a contact sport. And all these players, even if they have that personality of all the players that I just mentioned, they are just being too safe now. And them being too safe is taking away a big element of their game because that element comes naturally to them.
I think the fans like to see good tackles. We don't see a lot of crunching tackles these days. The closest we see to good defending being celebrated is when somebody blocks a chance and the players celebrate. There was a game
Hmm.
this weekend, I can't remember which game it was, where the players really celebrated defending a goal like they'd scored a goal because they're
Yeah.
going to get a clean sheet and they're going to win the game. And I think that's good to see, but I think fans do miss the sort of atmosphere of a real intense game. And we've got two players going in for a tackle. Nowadays, footballers are frightened of making tackles because if they time it wrong, they can get sent off or they get a yellow card and there's a foul or a penalty or whatever. Obviously, the penalty area is slightly different, but I mean, I'd like to see more crunching tackles, but you want to see safe crunching tackles. And it's a sign of how the game's changed, really. And
Mm.
it's gone too far one way, and when I was growing up, it was too far the other way. Players used to get really badly hurt. But then another thing that's changed is players used to have injections to make them play on when they were injured. So players in those days would get badly injured. They would get more long-term injuries, and also the medical side of the game wasn't what it is today. And I know Dennis, I've always known Dennis Law quite well. And so I know a lot of stories about Dennis, but he missed the 1968 European Cup final because he was injured. He had a knee injury. But when he had the operation, they cut through a lot of the muscle in his leg and he was never able to build it back up to the way it was before. So even though he was still a great player, he was never quite the same. after he had the knee operation. Whereas today, it would have been keyhole surgery and he'd been back playing in a couple of weeks, and he would not have had the trauma on his body that he had when he had his injury. And unfortunately, a lot of the older players who've since retired, some of them are not with us anymore. In later life, they've had a lot of battle scars to carry. You know, they've needed new body parts like knees and hips and stuff. And I think the modern day footballer is probably overprotected in a good way, I guess, because you've got to think about your later life. But I think the guys from the bygone eras, they really put their bodies on the line. And now the thing that we're really talking about a lot more recently is dementia, because a lot of players have been head injuries, and it's not been accepted as an industrial injury yet by the game. But for me, it's quite clearly an industrial injury. I mean, it's scientifically proven. I think it's 3.5 times more likely to suffer dementia if you played football. But the head injuries, I mean, it's clear that you can get head injuries from playing football. You know, I don't think you should ever have a game where you don't have heading. It's part of the game. And I know people who are campaigning to get heading removed from the game. But I don't agree with it. I think that, you know, maybe you should restrict the amount of heading practice done in training. Maybe you should restrict young people when their heads are still developing, whether or not they should be heading. But I think in the professional game, heading is part of the sport. I mean, if you go to another sport like boxing, boxing is all about being hit in the head. I know they have different rules, and I think probably boxers have to sign a waiver when they box that they're not going to sue for getting a head injury. Different sport, but you know the dangers of the sport when you do it. So I think there needs to be a little bit more education, a little bit more responsibility. So I think players are aware of the injury potential from heading the ball, but I think it needs to be laid out a little bit more clearly. I think the game needs to take responsibility for players who do have head injuries. It's not such an issue now with the top level because they earn so much money that they can look after themselves. But I know a lot of ex-footballers whose families are now struggling because their player is either needing care that he can't afford, or he's gone and the family are left, you know, without any income. So, you know, I think we need to be responsible and take responsibility for the older generations that have suffered from dementia. But I'm going off on a different tangent there. It's a little bit more. I know you're mentally united and you talk about mental health, but again, it's something that could be. I think it's something that's probably overlooked, to be honest. I think last time we spoke on one of my podcasts, we talked about how football clubs are they're not taking care in the way that they could be doing and taking responsibility for mental health. You know, I think we talked last time about players like, you know, one of the biggest problems these days, of course, if we haven't really talked about, is how players are trolled on social media. And I think last time we talked, Harry Maguire was really at rock bottom in terms of how badly he was being trolled and being blamed for everything. He seems to have won that battle and come through the other side, which, you know, you've got to greatly admire the mental strength of somebody like Harry Maguire, who's gone to the lowest depths of his career and been ridiculed, not just by fans, but by media people who have highlighted things that he's done wrong. And I think people have ignored the impact on people's mental health. I think when you go, you know, Marcus Rashford, I mean, when he's been disciplined, he's gone back and fought hard to get back into the team. You know, I do suspect that there might be mental health issues, just talking off the top of my head, looking at what I see. For me, the body language that I see sometimes in Marcus, mentally, I feel that maybe he needs a little bit of help. So, you know, you're the expert on that side, but I'm only speculating now. I don't know, but I feel sometimes that he should be taken out the firing line when he's getting abuse. But then on the other hand, maybe he's mentally strong because he wants to carry on and fight. So, you know, I can see it from both ways, but it's a subject that we don't really talk about a lot. And I don't think there's a lot of recognition. I mean, you've got a bit of, you know, people always talk about how much these players get paid. And yes, they get obscene amounts of money. But I think you need to separate that from the actual pressures of the game and the mental stress that they suffer. I mean, imagine that you're coming to take a penalty and the whole world's watching. And if you miss, you're going to get, you know, a lot of abuse. And the mental stress and pressure of doing that is incredible, I'd have thought. I mean, the heart rates of managers. I mean, Jock Stein died, didn't he? Used to be the manager of Celtic. The stress of the the matches is insane, really. And I think doesn't matter how much money you get, if your stress levels are killing you, it's no compensation. But that's a whole different
Definitely.
subject again. It's a whole different subject again, isn't it? But
No, for sure. I feel like at the end of the day, they are all human beings, and human beings function the same way. So all these players function the same way as we do, or as a lot of we do. And I personally feel like a lot of it has to do with social media and how accessible social media has become and how much it is difficult to stay away from it. Because back in the time, I remember I was reading Ferguson's book, and Fergie had a rule of no cell phones in the locker room in early 2000s, and he would not allow players to be on social media or interact with social media and stuff too when social media was new and all. But now you cannot do that. Now you can't put those same restrictions because back in the time you could ignore the noise, you could disconnect yourself from the newspapers, you could not watch the what do you call it, the post-match analysis and stuff, and just keep yourself regulated in a different way within your community, within your friends, within your team and stuff. Whereas now it's everywhere. You walk out of your home, you're abused. You open up your cell phone, tens and as you said, like everyone wants to be out there to put the news out first, so everyone has an opinion, everyone has a thought process. Cell phones and social media has given everyone a voice, so and a lot of these voices are just accounts that are either not real or burner accounts being managed by people without their actual photographs or without their actual information and stuff, but they say all these hurtful stuff or they criticize them in different ways, and then it just becomes an echo chamber where everyone starts doing the same thing. So it's much more difficult now, I feel like, in terms of disconnecting from the media or disconnecting from the negativity as compared to back in the day. And I genuinely feel like all the soccer clubs, all the football clubs, not just in England, but everywhere around the world, should have specific departments who help and coach and train these players on how to manage and navigate through those stresses because it's going to happen. Fan channels are always going to be there. Fan channels are always going to be putting out toxic stuff just to get their clicks on and just to get more views and stuff. So it has become more of a responsibility of a football club now to take action and coach their players or train their players as part of the program from youth levels so that they are aware that okay, the most important thing is our performance is not what all these extra noise is talking about, because people just love to talk and people just love to say negative things, and as humanistic nature, negative things usually get more attraction, negative things usually get more clicks and stuff, so those things continue. And a lot of times with how fast social media is moving and stuff, as you said, as we spoke about it earlier also, is that people just put out the news out there and then they go ahead few hours later and then start editing it up and start formatting it well. But the thing is, the damage is already done. The news is already out there, so a lot of people already believe in it. And that's where I feel like a lot of these rumors comes in, a lot of these things come in, and I feel like clubs are challenging it in a way in terms of not giving access to these players in terms of interviews, or as you said, having set questions, and you cannot ask any question aside from these set decided questions as a way to protect the players or as a way to protect the club. But I personally don't think that's the way to do it because that's again censorship. The way to do it is to coach these players, to have them have either mentors, therapists, or different people who life coaches who help them navigate these challenges and help them know that this is something that will come if you become successful because this is something that comes with success. But then how can you manage it? How can you navigate with it? How can you disconnect with it is a thing that should be coached and trained because not everyone has that. Or not everyone's born with those kinds of instincts, kind of a thing on how to navigate media or how to navigate that stuff. So it's definitely a lot and it's definitely affecting players and the game.
I agree with a lot of what you said there, but I personally love social media. I think it's brilliant. And I think what I like about it is that it's your platform where you can say what you want, but at the same time, you need to take responsibility for what you say. So if you've got fake accounts and you've got people spreading hate from fake accounts, so that's something that needs to be pulled back. But I think you mentioned a couple of key things there about it's about taking responsibility and coaching and training people. So I don't blame, in the same way that I don't blame VAR it's the way humans use it and the way it's misused. That's the same with social media. Social media is brilliant, but how it's misused by people doesn't mean that social media is bad. It means the people that are using it are bad. So it's how
Hmm.
I don't like too much regulation, but at the same time, I think it's important that people who are speaking on social media are real people and can prove that real people. And I mean, I like what Elon Musk has done with Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, because his way of filtering out the noise from the fake people is by, okay, he's monetized it. So if you want to be a serious voice on his platform, you can pay a small amount of money per month. But then to be recognized, you have to prove that you're a real person. So it's
Hmm.
whether or not you can go to that level and keep it free. The point is I think these social media platforms will always be free and there'll always be a free element because it can't survive otherwise. But it's how do you draw the line to make sure that the people who are using the platform are genuine people who are accountable for what they do or say? Because that's the thing,
Hmm.
really, because if you say something on social media, it's no different than going on the local TV channel or local radio or national TV or radio and speaking. You're speaking to the world. So if you say something which you can be sued for or, you know, face criminal charges for, it's no different on social media. Doesn't matter what the media is. It's just, I call it new media because
Hmm.
everybody's got access to the media, but it doesn't matter what media you're communicating on. It should be the same. It's the same, isn't it? So the way that people bypass it is by using these fake accounts. And that's really what needs to be cracked down on. For me, it's not cracking down on social media as a thing, although it's who takes responsibility. It's a bit like when YouTube first started, you see, when YouTube first started, it used to be open season for stealing people's content and putting it on YouTube. And then the rights holders said, well, we're going to close you down because we don't like people stealing our stuff. Then YouTube came up with a genius thing, which is content ID. So now if you put up some content, the rights holders can immediately identify that you've stolen their stuff. So the robots within seconds will see that you've stolen stuff. I mean, it's not as simple as that because if your content isn't already on there, you can't, it can't be recognized as being stolen. But then you do have the tools to go back there and have things removed. So they've proved that they can come up with the technology to make it better to solve the problem. How do you solve the problem of people spreading hate from fake accounts on social media? That's a different challenge. But I think it can be done. But I don't think I think going back to what you said there about taking responsibility in training and coaching, that's one of the most important things that, you know, if you go on social media, you should be aware that you're speaking to the world and what you say is going to have an impact and you're accountable for what you say. So that's where the training is needed. But I think a lot of the top players, especially, they love social media insofar that it enables them to basically put out their own statements. So, for example, a lot of TV channels now, rather than interviewing the player, they'll quote what you said on Twitter or on wherever the social media is, because they know those are the words. The sports person knows that their words are not going to get changed because that's what they've said. So
Hmm.
you can't have it both ways. Do you know what I mean? So I know that they like it because they can control what is said by them and it's reported properly because you can't change what somebody said if you see it in black and white. Obviously, when media, this is one of the things that I've seen that firsthand when I used to cover national newspaper stories for the tabloid newspapers. I've covered royal stories. I covered the Falklands War. But I remember covering royal stories in London and standing there in the street interviewing Koo Stark, who was a former girlfriend of Prince Andrew. And I'd be there with the guy from the Mirror and the Star, and I wrote my report. And then you see the paper the next day, and they've made it up. You know, they've literally made it up because they've made it up on the basis that they've spoken to this person. So they changed the words. So that's why, you know, I remember doing an interview with Ken Bates, used to be the chairman of Chelsea. He would only do a live interview because he knows that when you do it live, you can't change what you said because you're speaking live. But if you've got something, you've got a recording, you can edit it and you can change the meaning subtly by leaving bits out, taking it out of context. And that's why I think social media is good for sports people putting out their own statements because it's not going through a third party who's changing the meaning of what they've said. the meaning of what they said is what they've said. So it gives them more control about how they're heard. But at the same time, you've got to have the education and the training to make sure that you're not dropping yourself in it by saying stupid stuff or being libelous. So it's used in many different ways. But I think the training and people also understanding, just ordinary public understanding. You've got to understand what you're hearing and what you're seeing. So you need to be able to read between the lines. Okay, fan channels take it to a different level when they speculate, but I think the toxicity created by fan channels is deliberate toxicity because they get their audience by pitching people against each other. If you've got two people arguing different sides of the argument, that's what creates the discussion and it creates the audience because people interact because they disagree, and you got people arguing. They want people to argue.
Mm-hmm.
But that goes back to the national media because the media have always thrived on conflict. I go back to when I was a football supporter back in the early days, on the Stretford end, you'd applaud sometimes when the other team did something good because you'd recognize good play. It's very rare now to recognize and give credit to the opposition team because there's too much hatred. But I blame the media for causing that hatred because, what used to be the national media, the legacy media, is now the social media. I don't see the difference really. Media is media. And I think what we see on the things that are done on social media now is not really much different than what's done by the legacy media, because the legacy media would make things up. They would tell lies. They still do. I've seen it firsthand. And they pitch people against each other. And I remember being in the Sun newspaper when I used to do shifts there a long time way back. They'd make a commercial decision about running a story, even though they knew they couldn't prove it was true, because they knew that they were, for example, they'd run a story about Elton John. I won't go into what the story was, but they knew the most they were going to get fined was like £250,000 in fines for telling this story. But they were going to make £500,000 in extra sales. So a commercial decision is to run the story, even though we can't prove it, because we're going to make a profit. And that's what people need to realize. The media is a business, and people do it to make money. So you need to read between the lines, and it's almost like a skill to be able to filter out what's fact and what's fiction. So some things are clearly facts because you're reporting something that's just happened, or somebody's been bought or sold. But it's a speculation. That's where the fiction comes in, because media these days, a lot of them are not really what I call journalists. They're basically almost like PR people who are being used by different sides of the narrative, because we've got people spinning the story for the football club, the other football club, the business people, the players, the agents. And when you hear a story which is really speculative, you've got to read between the lines and try and work out why that story is being spun that way. That's why a lot of what you see in the media is what I call kite flying. They're running stories based on assumptions and calculations and guesswork, and sometimes information that's come from sources, but those sources have got an agenda. Those sources might give the information, but they give you information based on what they want to happen, not on what the story necessarily is going to be. So it's kind of a minefield, really. But whether it's legacy media or social media, I don't diss the platform. It's always, you've got to be able to, who's telling me this information? Have they got authenticity? And you need to cross-reference in the same way that a journalist should cross-reference his story 2 or 3 times to prove that it's true. You need to cross-reference what you see in the media with different sources and see who's telling the same story. But then a lot of the media work in packs. You see, I've covered stories as a national newspaper reporter, and they work as a pack, and they decide what the story is going to be. They get together in a little corner and say, right, what's the angle? What we're going to do? I was quite often independent to that because I like to get my own exclusives. But that's the way the media work a lot of the time. They do it to protect themselves. They do it to get the story, to protect themselves, because if you've got the story and I haven't got it, I'm going to get dragged out of bed. Why haven't you got the story? So some of them play it safe and they all decide what the story is and all cover the same story. So it depends on where you're working in the media and what's your position in the media, because there's always going to be people trying to get exclusives, and not everybody works as packs. I'm talking about what used to happen when I used to work in the media. I know it still happens now to a certain degree, but the media is totally different now, you know. Whereas I'd turn up at England training session, it'd be me and one cameraman. Now you've probably 50 cameras and you have to get accredited. I just literally turned up off the street and walked in and set the camera up and started asking questions. Whereas nowadays you can't do that,
Yeah.
except in rare situations. I actually did it last year with Mason Greenwood. I was filming something else and he happened to be playing on the next pitch. So I got an exclusive. But I literally walked in off the street into it was a hotel complex where there was a training pitch, and I was agreed to meet somebody else to do some filming. It just so happened that he was on the next pitch, but there was no security. Anybody could have walked in with a camera and taken those pictures, but that's quite rare. It was off the beaten track, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, some people use the media that, you know, Princess Diana, for example, I loved Princess Diana, but I know that she used to brief the media, you know, be in a certain place to get a picture. All celebrities do that. You know, they use the media when they want to use them, and then they cry when they get, you know, stuff written about them that they don't like. But then a lot of the stuff that gets written about them or talked about, a lot of it is fiction made up. That's the reality of the media, which is, you know, we haven't got the, we used to have a lot more what I call gentlemen. We had less, you know, we had gentle ladies as well, where they used to be more old fashioned and honorable in what they wrote most of the time. Whereas now, there's not a lot of honor, I don't think, in a lot of. There are some great journalists out there. Don't get me wrong. And most of us know who we think are the good people that give us information, and those are our trusted sources. But there's a lot of pressure. You see, you know, you're working for a national brand publisher. You're under pressure to get stories every day. So if you haven't got a story, what are you going to do? It's obvious. You make it up or you speculate.
Mm-hmm. I feel like narratives and agendas are being pushed around and are definitely becoming more and more common. Day by day, I feel like it's becoming hard to know what the most authentic news is, whether that be in mainstream media or social media or what they call it these days, alternative media. I feel like it's creating a lot of damage, not just in the sports world, but in our everyday life and our communities and our society. Anyways, going a little bit back around your own journey as a United fan, you mentioned that you were born in '59, which makes me think that you must have experienced winning all the three trophies. Um, how was that experience like?
That's fantastic. The game was changed. I mean, my hero was Georgie Best. So I remember the 1968 European Cup final. I was 8 years old, you know, eight and a bit, 8.5, and watched it on a little black and white telly with my dad. And it was a different experience in those days because, you know, you didn't have color television, for example, so everything was in black and white, and it was only a small telly. I mean, the telly I was watching it on was probably about the size of my laptop, and it was kind of had a slightly oval shape to it. I think my mum had got it from the market for. No, I think we got it second hand, but televisions in those days, it was relatively new, wasn't it? Really, it wasn't even that many channels. But I remember the game, and I was disappointed that George Best didn't score in 90 minutes. But then when he scored an extra time, that was the moment that I really thought, yeah, we're definitely going to win this. And I still remember now how I felt, and I remember how pleased my dad was
Mm-hmm.
because obviously he'd supported United from well before the Munich air disaster, and it was like it was fabulous. But then again, moving on to '99 when we won the treble, you know, I remember I couldn't go to the game because I was going through. I didn't have a ticket, and I was poor at the time, even though my business was suffering. We were going through uh, losing a lot of contracts, and so I went back to Manchester. I thought if I can't be at the game, I can't be at Barcelona. I'll be at Manchester with my own people. So I watched it with two of my brothers in the pub. But I remember after the game, it felt like the whole of Manchester was out on the street. You could saw
Yeah.
sirens going, horns going, people were driving, flags coming out of cars, and you know, until the early hours of the morning. And it was a fabulous experience to be in Manchester. And then because where my mum lives, uh, and my dad was still around then, the actual parade of honour where they brought the three trophies started at the end of the road where my mum just round the corner from where my mum lived. So I remember being there for the parade. And I remember David Beckham being at the front when he was at Brooklyn Station. where the parade was coming from. And then I remember following it down to the A56, and the A56 went all the way to Old Trafford and into Manchester. I didn't follow it all the way, but I was on foot. I remember filming it on a little camera, a little DV cam camera. I've got some footage somewhere which has never been seen, which I
I'd
was
love to
hoping to
see
use
it.
in an upcoming documentary. But I did offer it to the Netflix people that did the David Beckham documentary, but they decided to use something else. And but that's, sometimes that's how I survive, by selling archive footage. But I have some archive footage that's destined for films that are long-term projects. And quite often when I'm making documentaries, I make them over 3, 4, 5 years longer. And I have ideas about things that I'll do in the future. I think I've got that bit of footage that'll come in useful for that story there. And one of the films that I've been working on for quite a long time, but I need an end destination and I need a little bit of a budget to finish. We Will Never Die. It's really about keeping alive the legacy and the history of our football club, and how do we become this great institution that's globally supported. I was looking for a sort of more positive end to it rather than where we are at the moment. And also I wanted more of a conclusion, because we had all this uncertainty about the Glazers, and are they selling, or they're not selling, are they going to sell part of the club, whatever. And also we had 3 years of lockdowns and coronavirus, and the whole market was destroyed. So that kind of put that project on a sort of little bit of a mini hold, well, long hold really. So it's kind of like elongated the time that I spent making it. But the bottom line is I've got a lot of great content that will make a great film. I just need an end destination for it, because it's not a film I can just put out on my own channels. Well, I could do, but I wouldn't make any money. I wouldn't make very much money. I've got to try and it's an investment, and I need to try and sell it to broadcasters really. But that's a whole different story. Again, that goes to how things have changed. Back in the 90s, I used to make a lot of films and literally publish them on videos, VHS videos. It was in those days that became DVDs. But I could make a lot of money by publishing a film, because we had a massive audience that would buy them. I've had titles that have sold 20,000 on day one.
Well,
You won't get many titles that'll sell 20,000, even if it's like a blockbuster these days. So monetizing in the 90s was a lot easier, because we had a market, we had an audience, we had people that would buy our films, we had broadcasters who would buy content. Whereas now nobody wants to pay, unless you're Netflix or Amazon, who seem to have massive budgets, but then they want to control the narrative and the story and the asset. I'd rather make things independently so I can control the narrative, because I want to tell the story the way that I want to tell it. So but that's probably why I'm poor.
No, I feel like the world needs more people like you, more journalists like you, going against the structure or what the norms are may at the time not bring abundance, but I know that your work is going to live forever and will be stitched in history, and will be watched 50 years down the line because it's authentic, it's genuine, it's historic. And personally, aside from Stratford Paddock, the club, Rio Ferdinand's channel, whose work, all three of these works I highly respect. I feel like all the other fan channels and the work that they're doing, it's very much based around what's latest, what's not, and it gets evaporated within a week because then the new cycle comes through.
They used to say like today's newspapers is tomorrow's chip wrapper. I mean, it's pretty much the same with fan channels. What they say today is out of date by tomorrow, or certainly by next week. Whereas a lot of the stuff that I do, I make stuff with longevity. So I'll do stuff which is there forever and it's timeless. And because it's timeless, hopefully over a period of time, it will build up a bigger audience.
hmm
But some of the content I put out, it will never change, because the story is the story. You
Yeah.
become, like I did a 4-part series with the former president of the world's oldest Man United supporters club, Joe Glanville, who's got an amazing story as a fan. His life story is his life story, and it's there forever. And I've done it largely because Joe's become a friend. I've become close to the supporters club. It's there as a piece of history that will be there for, for decades, hopefully. Well, as long as the platforms and the content is still viewable, I mean, you are reliant on the platforms where you put it still being there. But then as new platforms come up, it's possible for me to put it elsewhere. But I mean, the story itself, as long as there's a version of it available to view, it's a timeless story, which is there as part of history. I see it as part of history. Same when I've done a lot of interviews with former players. Like I did the last proper big interview with Bobby Charlton. I've done lots of interviews with Dennis Law. I did the last interview with Nobby Stiles, who's no longer with us. I did the last interview with Alex Dawson, who played in the 1958 FA Cup semi-final when United had a patched-up team of survivors and kids that got us to the FA Cup final. John Fitzpatrick. So many players that I've done what I see are bits of history because those interviews, last interviews that they've done, and they're there to remind people of who they were and what their stories were in their own words. So I kind of do more of that because I think it's got more value in terms of value to fans and society rather than value to me in making instant cash. I'd make more money just talking live and talking, not sure if I'm allowed to swear, bollocks, talking garbage.
No. And for all the listeners, I'll be putting out links to all of John's work in the description. So please go and check it out. I assure you it's historical and it's really, really, really inspirational. I know, John, we are short on time. So I'd love to ask you, in your own personal experience, how have you seen the topic of mental health evolve over the last few years or since you started your journalism work? And I ask this because a lot of players are coming out now and sharing their mental health struggles. And personally, from an outer lens and perspective, it feels like a change is happening, but would love to hear what you think about it.
I think it's one of the things that's changed the most. I mean, when I first started, the recognition and appreciation of mental health problems was non-existent. People would have absolutely zero idea about people with mental health problems. If you said that you had a mental health problem, people would look down on you and think you were some sort of weirdo. And just, why have you got a mental health problem? What's wrong with you? Just sort your life out. I mean, that's kind of what the attitude would have been, until quite recent times, to be honest. I mean, now we've made great progress, but I still think there's still a journey to go on because I think, people are more open to talking about their own mental health. People are more open to getting help with mental health, and people are more appreciating that other people do have mental health problems, but it's not universally so. I think a lot of people still will probably lack the education, the sympathy, the empathy with people that do have mental health issues. I think we all have mental health issues to a certain degree. Is that some of us don't get dragged down by it to a level where it becomes a serious problem that they can't function from day to day. But I think everybody suffers from, even if you think about, you have good days and you have bad days, some days where you feel good, some days where you feel bad. To me, that's a mental health thing in a way, because when you have a good day, your mental health is strong, isn't it? When you have a bad day, your mental health is going to be damaged in some way, even if it's only periodic, for that day or for that week, or you're getting over some sort of problem or, tragedy or injury or divorce or redundancy. All those things have got to affect your mental health. It's inevitable. And I think people need to, I think society as a whole just probably needs to be more educated and find out about it a little bit more and be more empathetic to people who have problems. I think we've come a long, long way. We've come, to a situation where it's kind of acceptable what we have, but I think we can still improve. That's my personal gut feeling. I think I've probably been through mental health issues that I've not even recognized as being mental health issues, because I've been through some tough times. I've had some great successful times. I've hit rock bottom. But I think you find out what you're made of individually when you have problems that will. I think when you have any problem, it affects your mental health. It's a case of how resilient you are to those problems and how you repair and how you get through them. But I think recognizing the fact that mental health is a thing that you need to guard and protect is helpful to everybody, because we all need to protect our own mental health. It's just that we've never really been aware of it in previous generations. That's how I would try and sum it up and see it.
For sure, yeah. You mentioned that you've been through some low times yourself, like a lot of us go through. So during those low times, how important was family and community for you? And how important, or what was the role that United played for you in terms of helping you get through those tough times?
I think it's important to have things that you love in life. I mean, we haven't talked about one of my passions are being a storyteller, creating media, whether it's words, pictures, stills. I get a lot of pleasure from that. That's my hobby, as well as what I do to try and make money. Sport has always been a huge passion for me, and my religion. That's why I call my brand the religion is following Manchester United. That gives me comfort. I have a group of friends around the world who are all part of our big red family. They give me comfort. But my other big passion is dancing. We haven't talked about. I mean, I go dancing sometimes 2, 3 nights a week. I was dancing last night. I'll be dancing tonight, Wednesday, and I'm going dancing again on Sunday.
Wow.
I think dancing is the thing that's got me through the biggest problems, really, because it's I can switch off when I go there. It doesn't matter how bad a day I've had. I could have written off my car, or I could have lost money on a bet, although I don't bet. I could have like had a deal that's gone down. I could have had some bad news. But when I go dancing, uh, it's like the endorphins kick in. I know it helps my mental health, and I know it does. But it's how it makes you feel. Having something that makes you feel good. That is my biggest protection from being dragged down. So it doesn't matter how bad life is, uh, and how many setbacks I have. When I go out dancing, that's it's kind of it's not a drug, but it's almost like an addiction, but it's a good addiction. And I know it keeps me healthy, it keeps me fit. I'll be 65 this year, and I know that I'm fitter than people half my age. And it's partly through dancing, partly through having good genes, partly through having a good health lifestyle. I don't smoke. I've never smoked. I don't drink too much. I can drink a lot when I'm in certain company, often with a group of football players, but I can go weeks, even months at a time and not drink. I don't need drink. So I've looked after myself physically, but I think, you know, that again, that journey of looking after myself physically helps my mental health, because I think how you feel physically is going to affect your mental health. So if you're feeling sluggish, tired, you can't, I've got a granddaughter, she's 2.5, you know, I enjoy going to see my granddaughter, and she's got a little scooter, but I can run in front of her, filming on my mobile phone, and I'm fit enough to do it. Do you know what I mean? So that those little things that you said, talk about family is important. Although I've always been the oldest in my family. Do you know what I mean? I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so I've been like the godfather. I've always been the person that people come to when they've got a problem. And also because running my company, when I used to hire a lot of staff, I probably employed about 50 different people over a period of time. Don't employ anybody at the moment, but I've always been the person that they've always come to with their problems, because I've always been an easy person to talk to. That's one of my gifts, I think. I'm easy to talk to. So people have always confided with me when they've needed help and advice on problems. I've always been in the situation where I've never really had anybody to go to when I've got a problem. So in a way that makes your mental health more vulnerable, because you haven't really got anybody to talk to when you got your own problems. So what I do is I say, right, come back tomorrow, go dancing, or go and watch a football match. Or I used to go to the gym a lot, but I cancelled my gym membership before we had the first lockdown, and haven't. I've been a little bit hard up, so I've not renewed the gym membership. But I know physically fit because I have my dancing. I used to go to the gym really to strengthen and do a little bit of load bearing exercises, but I do stuff at home sometimes. I've got a little bit slack recently because I've been working too hard trying to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's important for anybody to have whatever their hobby, whatever their passion is, to focus on that when they need a bit of a lift, and to make sure you got something in your life and it's not just work. Although I don't see work as work. I mean, I work harder than anybody I know, but I see it as what I do for pleasure as well as work. But you still need something else. You need to be able to turn to something else. So I think it's important for anybody. My advice as a guy coming up for 60 this year is to have a passion, and to that's your safety valve. It could be reading, it could be walking, it could be canoeing, it could be anything that you want to do. It could be dressmaking. Have something where you can get lost doing that passion. That's what I That's what I believe anyway.
For
My
sure, I
passion
completely
stops.
No, I completely agree with you on that. Having a passion or having some sets of passions that you can tap into or navigate with when you're not feeling really good, it's extremely important. I'm really happy for you that you are doing work that's your passion so that it does not feel like work. But even aside from that, having some outlets are really important. Manchester United was my outlet when I was growing up, and I went through a very troubled childhood in my early days, and United literally pulled me out of a lot of hard times in terms of the games, listening to Sir Alex speak around building resilience, never giving up. That really built me as a person, as who I am right now, and really impacted me in a lot of different ways and kept me alive in a lot of different situations too. So definitely, I always encourage, because I'm a therapist, I work with younger kids. I always encourage them and their families to find different passions or to tap into different energies where these kids could find themselves to be happy, to be relaxed, to be in their zone, whether that be painting, drawing, arts, dance, outside time, jumping on a trampoline, playing soccer, football, anything. It could be literally anything. And dancing is a really good way of getting all that energy out of your body because as you're moving, you're going and moving in different moves, you're going out of breath, and that really takes out a lot of negative energy that gets boiled up into your body. So doing that weekly, that's really inspirational, and I really hope that other people do that too. Just to wrap things up, what are some projects that you're manifesting or you're working on, or any documentaries that you uh, being might be in terms of long-term projects or short-term projects that you are collaborating or working on?
I've got a few long-term projects at the moment. I'm making the documentaries that I'm working on. I mentioned before, We Will Never Die, which is kind of like a story about how Man United became where we are today. But that includes things like the last ever interview with Harry Gregg, for example, that's never been seen. He was the hero of Munich who raced into the crash and rescued Bobby Charlton, Matt Busby, and other people. He rescued a pregnant lady with a young child. But that's a long-term project, and it's going to be partly a tribute to Jimmy Murphy, the man who saved Manchester United. I'm also doing a couple of other little films. I'm doing a film about a friend of ours, Yera Vertanen, who's like, it's kind of a story about fandom, really, and why, you know, people become obsessed with their football team, and our football team is Manchester United. Yera started off supporting United, I think, about 7 years old, and he's got 35,000 pieces of memorabilia he collected over his lifetime. So he opened his own museum. The story's gone on from there, but I've part shot that documentary. I just need to get to a conclusion and have somewhere to put it. I'm also doing a remake of the story about the world's oldest Manchester United supporters club. So those are three films about Manchester United, which is kind of my passion. But the world's oldest Manchester United supporters club, it's their 65th anniversary this year. Going to be doing some filming in Malta again in June. I went there in January when it was the official anniversary date of the 65th anniversary. And I went there with Mike Phelan and David May, former Man United players. And then we flew to Munich because the supporters club started a year after the Munich air disaster. I mean, kind of coincidentally, and this is one of the reasons that I made the film about the Maltese supporters club, is because I'm half Maltese. My mum's from Malta. I'm from Manchester. I was born in 1959. That's when the supporters club started. I'm half Maltese because my mum's from Malta, and my team is Manchester United. So there were three reasons that I made that film, and it became a passion project. But I've not made any money from it because I spent a lot of money making it, and then it came out just at the beginning of the COVID, so I didn't have any opportunity to sell it to broadcasters. So I'm hoping that by remaking it, it'll give it a new life and updating it. And then my biggest asset really is my archive. I've got about 5,000 hours of archive. That's a lot of it was filmed in the 90s when my company was at its heights, really. But a lot of stuff that I've acquired and bought, and I've got a lot of archive here, and I'm looking at a long-term deal. I don't want to go into the details because it's not been announced, but there's a streaming platform in America where I'm hoping that they're going to help digitize and license the material. So that could be a long-term project. I'm hoping it's going to be in the short term because I need the money. There's also another film that I'm working on, which is where I'm going to be hired by a distributor. And it's going to be a film about another football club. I'm probably not at liberty to talk about it yet because I don't think it's been publicly announced. But it's a huge story. but it's not really just about football. It's about something that happened to one of the players who got killed, which is about as much as I can say. That gives you a clue about who it might be, but it's got a lot of legal arguments and politics and a lot of background story to it, which is a lot more interesting. It's not really about football per se. It's about the story behind the football club and what happened. So that's something that I'm really excited about, and hopefully that's going to start soon.
Gotcha.
So I'm
And
constantly juggling things, as you can hear, really. I'm hoping to get back to America for the pre-season tour, which is where I met you, wasn't it, in San Diego, and I went to Las Vegas as well. I'm hoping to get back there, but I'm reliant on, you very kindly said you promote some of my stuff, which is very kind because I rely on people growing the audience. But what I'm trying to do at the moment is try and find sponsors either for content or for the channel, because I'm reaching a point where I can't carry on doing what I'm doing unless I start making money. And what I've done in the past, I've made money doing other things that have subsidized me creating my own content to put on my own channels. But I'm getting to a point where I'm running out of road and need to get some money coming in. I built up the audience, I built up the following, I built up the awareness, I built up the exposure, I built up the credibility. Now I need sponsors to help me create more content. As long as I don't want to control the narrative, I can give them a good window, but not just a good window, but a long-term window, because the content, as we've talked about, has got longevity. So there's a possibility I could go back to San Diego if a sponsor comes in and sponsors a series of short little mini documentaries about the supporters club over there and the trip. So things like that, really. And I do a bit of freelance work for BBC Sport. I do Match of the Day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a month.
No, I wish you all the best in all the work that you are doing or would be doing. And as I said, that I'll be linking up all of your videos in the description. So folks, please do check it out. They are extremely informative, historic, and I personally feel like you won't find stories or documentaries like these anywhere else. And I do hope that you do find the right sponsors and come visit us here in the US, because I would love to meet with you in either San Diego or Los Angeles during the United tour. And probably, like, go on a walk with you just like we did last time in Vegas, or just chat around and catch up more, because I feel like the community that United is building, the community that we made up during the last Manchester United preseason tour, was really powerful. And
Thank you, Z. It's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again. I really hope we can get to meet again in San Diego or Las Vegas or both, or as long as we can get to meet again. I'm sure we will. And hopefully it will be sooner rather than later. Thank you.
thank you so much, John. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day, and cannot wait to meet you or catch up with you soon another time. Thank you.